membership, which I hope you would grant. But anyway. This weekend, as mentioned, tonight I'm going to talk about the question of religion, what we commonly refer to as religion. It's a hot topic, very much in the public eye, and the opinions about religion are fairly adverse. I'll talk about that, and the way you define religion or the way you understand religion has profound implications for the way you practice religion or whether you practice it at all or not. And so I want to address that. And tomorrow, as your pastor said, in the morning I'm going to take on the question of, is religion historically been good for humans or not? And the answer to that is yes. And then in the afternoon I'm going out on a limb. I am a foundationalist. I like to spend time thinking about the way knowledge is produced, the way thought systems are developed. And I've been hauling wheat this summer. You know, I retired on August 31, and that doesn't mean I'm inactive. It means that I'm now doing things that I choose to do instead of being rigorously programmed, such as professors are. You know, you're programmed quite seriously. I could tell you when I was fully employed that next year at 11 o'clock on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'll be in that place. But anyway, I have a friend who's a farmer, and he has big trucks. I like big trucks, and I've been hauling hay down from Walla Walla through Pendleton down to a little town called Long Creek, and delivering it down there. And there's a lot of thinking time when you're going up a hill at 30 miles an hour. And so I got to thinking about some of the foundational questions that go around in my head and how they pertain to science. And so I'm going out on a limb tomorrow afternoon to talk about science. And I have a few disclaimers to make tomorrow afternoon that I am not anti-science. I just like to think about how the foundational questions about human knowing affect the way we view science. So thank you for being here. I mentioned that I am fascinated by foundational things. Okay, there are many people who like to debate and discuss the minute points of practice and doctrine endlessly. You know, at what point is a woman's dress meet the standard of modesty? Should you ride your bicycle for fun on Sabbath? Is it okay to drink liquid when you eat your food? Should a woman or a man wear a wedding ring? You know, is it okay to canoe on Sabbath? I mean, I think of all these debates that have gone on endlessly in Adventism, and I think doctrine is very important, but the minutiae has not fascinated me anywhere as much as looking at the foundational elements that upon which thought systems are built. And so I'm sorry that I am disinterested in some of the minutiae we argue about. Okay, for example, the age of the earth, it does not interest me anymore. To me, it's inconsequential. There are a lot of other things that if you want to debate them, have a nice day. I like to think about foundational things, and so I'm coming here tonight and this weekend to approach these subjects from a foundationalist point of view. And by the way, the word foundationalist is not a theological term. It's one that I apply to myself because there is no word to describe what I'm interested in. Okay? It's just not there. So I want to begin here with something very basic, that all human beings, we all find ourselves in the same circumstance, in this way. That we are part of a parade of life that we did not ask to join, and it's one we do not fully understand. I don't think any of you would argue against that. Did any of you ask to be born? No, that decision was made either deliberately or inadvertently by other people. And do you fully understand the reality that you are a part of? And I suspect you will all say, no, there are some things that we don't understand. In addition to that, our journey through life is rather short. You know, I just retired after almost 45 years of full-time employment as an Adventist minister and professor, and I think to myself, wow, that went by pretty quickly. You know, it goes by quickly, and you know, I don't think I'll tell you how old I am, but I'm getting old. No, I don't feel old, but, and you know, you look back on life and it hasn't been all that long. It goes by fairly quickly. And I'm reminded that when my own father retired years ago, he said to his 4 sons, live well. Live well. Life moves very quickly. Okay? So the duration is limited. And all of us face the same basic task of trying to make sense of our existence. See? And how do we go about making sense of our existence? See, it's a challenge because as far as we know, we only make this journey one time. And we struggle from what this old German minister once described to me as the problem that we get too soon old and too late smart. He had a heavy accent, and that's how his English came out. He says, we get too soon old and too late smart. And perhaps you've noticed there's no rewind button. Okay? I think all of us would like to, on a few occasions, back things up and say, let's try that again and do it somewhat differently. There's no rewind button. Okay? So the way humans do this, the way we make sense out of life, is that and I often use the words, we cobble together. I have a more delicate term here, we are collecting together, but we actually cobble together all kinds of stories that have explanatory value. These stories are very interesting. When I was driving up here this evening, I was thinking about some of the stories that have had a formative effect on my life. Okay? And you know, some of them are interesting, some of them are silly, some of them are profound, and yet I'm thinking that maybe I need to write a book entitled Stories That, I don't know, I haven't figured it out yet, formed me or helped form me or made me who I am. And I came up just while sitting in my pickup truck driving up here through the rain. I have quite a few stories I can look back at. Some of them from infancy, some of them from high school, quite a few of them from high school, some of them from college and so on and so forth. But we collect these together and we create a synthesis between them. And what they do is they provide for us a big picture of life that we call a worldview. Right? That's how we cobble these stories together. And it's interesting that some of these stories are factually true. They are historical things that happened that corral our interest and have explanatory value. But many of them are fabrications. You see that phrase there, once upon a time. Now when you hear somebody and they say, once upon a time, what do you know immediately? I mean, there's a very high probability that this is a made-up story. But it's made up for a purpose. It teaches something about life and the elements of life so that you can then have some kind of a context. And so if you look at the Bible, it's a Bible that's full of stories. It's not full of theological statements. It's not full of mathematical calculations. It's full of stories. And some of the stories are easy to understand. Some of them make you scratch your head and you wonder, what is that story all about? Why is that even in there? And yet, if you take the document as a whole, you realize it is telling a big story. And I have been very blessed by a gentleman who pointed out to me that, and this was from reading a book, he said that we have to learn to look through language. Okay? You look through language to see what it's portraying. If you look at language too much, you get bogged down in all kind of grammatical and word studies and never get to the point. Okay? But somebody compared language to a set of binoculars. You can spend all your time looking at binoculars and arguing about how they were made and who made them and whether the lenses were ground the right way. But if you look through them, you see a vision of reality, and that's what language provides meaning. And so when you look at these stories all brought together, in the biblical story, it tells the story of Eden lost to Eden restored. Okay? All these stories have a grand theme that runs through them. That's how we make sense out of life. Okay? And see, once you have all these stories put together into a grand system, you have a context into which you can fit your life. You can now talk about origins. Where did you come from? Okay? You can talk about purpose and direction, you have reference points, you have moral codes, you even have a sense of identity. If I ask you, who are you? You would start telling me stories. You wouldn't tell me your height and weight and DNA sequence. You would start telling me stories, probably saying, well, I was born in such and such a place, okay? And your identity is tied to stories. See, this is how we as human beings make sense out of life. We get these stories together from all kinds of places. They formed into a conglomeration that tells a big story that provides a map, a mind map for us, and we can put ourselves in there. And then I know who I am and where I came from and where I'm going, okay? Now, all of this is a product of the process of knowing. And philosophically, this is the study of epistemology. And this is, I think last time I was here I mentioned epistemology. It's in a way a very fascinating thing to me, but it's profoundly complicated. Okay? I am not an epistemologist. In some ways I wish I were. I have a professor who's an epistemologist, and half the time I have no idea what he's talking about. You know, he's using all these words and so on, but the basics of epistemology are not hard to understand, and they are fascinating, and they have a profound effect on the way that I look at life. So I asked the question here tonight, how does knowing take place? Right? And in particular, what are the initial things we have to do in order for the process of knowing to get started? You see, the process of knowing has to begin somewhere. So what is it that what are the first things that have to happen? Because nothing comes from nothing, right? You remember that song? It states a profound truth. Nothing comes from nothing. So something has to be set in place in order for the process of knowing to begin. And this is what has been fascinating me. And the answer to that question is that the process of knowing begins with us making some assumptions. Now, what is an assumption? It's something you assume. Right? You assume this to be the case. Now, when we talk about assumptions, we're not talking about proofs. We're not talking about things that are set in concrete, things that are incontrovertible. We're talking about things that I assume to be so. Okay? These are sometimes called posits by philosophers, and notice they are not provable. They have to be set down prior to any tests of truth being adopted or established. So I cannot prove to you my assumptions, my posits. They are not provable. Okay? I can only adopt them and advocate for them. And I'm not saying there's no evidence for my assumptions. There is evidence, but it's soft. Okay? It comes in the form here, and you look at that. Educated guesses, hunches, cultural mandates, traditions, experience, even personal preferences. And so what I'm saying is that when I set out to make my body of knowledge, my personal preferences will affect which assumptions I begin with. Okay? Even my personal preferences will do that. So I make an aside here. When you realize this, you understand that arrogance is a very unbecoming thing for humans. Okay? Arrogance should not be part of our lives, because our thought processes begin with assumptions that we cannot prove, and I don't care what discipline you're in. That pertains. That's always true. See? So, I have here a slide that is a developmental one, and I use this little device in some classes that I used to teach. I guess I have to say that now. I call it the knowledge equation, and it begins on the right side, at least on my screen, with objective things. Okay? These are objective things. You have facts, you have observations, numbers, you have hard stuff. We commonly call it data. And I think last time I was here I mentioned the fact that in our society we're very well versed in data. We know what data is. We know how to store it, process it. We ask sophisticated questions about it. Who came up with it? Did they use the right techniques? Has anybody messed around with it? We have all these questions. We understand data. What we don't understand so well in our society is that data is not knowledge. Data is data. Okay? That it has to somehow be processed or analyzed in order to become knowledge. And so on the other side, yeah, you have subjective things, ideas, opinions, presuppositions. And you have faith, and I put faith in quotation marks because what I mean by that is that you are trusting that the system you have developed is credible. I'm not talking here about faith in God. I'm talking about I make these assumptions and I believe them to be true, and in that sense I trust the system to produce knowledge for me. Okay? And by the way, we call this a system. So when a data and system interact, and reason is the engine that does that, lo and behold, out of the bottom is precipitated something called knowledge. And you can say knowledge comes in bits, and when you assemble the bits of knowledge, you get subject matter. So all human knowing takes place this way. You have a body of data that you've gathered, that you have analyzed and you believe is now credible and solid, and then you have a system of interpreting that data. And lo and behold, you're quite pleased with your system, and so when it produces knowledge, you say, now I have truth. Okay. Well, depends on, and may I make the point that error can come from either data or system. You can have good data and process it badly and you get junk. Or you can have a good system and feed it bogus data and you end up junk knowledge. See? So both sides of these are interesting. And what has intrigued me over the years is that until probably the year 1999, which is not that long ago, I never thought about the fact that there's a system for processing data. I just assumed that data was knowledge. It's not. Okay? It has to be processed. And so my fascination has been with the system side. Sorry. So important here to notice that these foundational assumptions or posits that we make are like the footings in a house. And I have a picture there of footings. If any of you have been in the building trade, you know what a footing is. You dig out the dirt till you get undisturbed ground, and you build these forms, and you fill them with concrete, maybe 6 or 8 inches, with rebar, and hopefully wide enough to sustain your house. And you pour those, and then the foundation walls are built on that. And you understand that those footings are of enormous significance, because they determine the shape of the house, the size of the house, how heavy the house can be, and how durable it's going to be. And I'm reminded of a gentleman who used to be my conference president back on the East Coast. When he was a young man, he was sent to a church district because they wanted to build a new church, and they didn't have a lot of money. And so he devised this idea. He says, well, we're going to do this economically. And it happened to be in the state of Pennsylvania where there are a lot of rocks. And he said they brought a backhoe to the property and they dug out trenches where the foundation was to be. And then he commissioned all the church members to go out in the fields and come back with rocks. And a lot of those rocks are kind of round, and they filled up the trenches with rocks. And then they called in the concrete trucks and told the concrete guy, make it soupy, so that when it goes in over the rocks, it'll all filter down and it'll all fill in all the gaps. And lo and behold, after several weeks of work, they had this foundation. It looked pretty good. They built the church. After 2 winters, guess what they discovered? Cracks all over the building. There was no re-rod in the foundation, and round stones don't really hold that well. And so the whole church was now in the frost heaves, had now shifted and cracked. And how are they going to fix that, by the way? Let's see. What you do with the footings is very important. And in philosophical and theological thought, okay, posits determine what the plausibility structures will be in your system. In other words, the initial assumptions you make determine what will be allowed in your thought system and what will be dismissed. Okay? And I have an example here that if you look at materialism, materialists who believe that the physical universe is all there is, it's the sum total of reality, and we can say it this way, that they merge cosmology and metaphysics. Cosmology is a study of the cosmos. Metaphysics is the discussion of all possible things. And what materialists do is that they merge those. They assume those two things are the same, that cosmology is metaphysics. That's not a provable point, it's an assumption they make. But look at the result. What happens then is that any ideas or claims that do not have, that do not have materialistic explanations are either denied or given materialistic explanations. See, and so I remember, pardon me while I have a little sip here. I remember encountering this in seminary back in the day. I was reading a big fat commentary on the Old Testament, and it had some liberal scholars who had written it, and I still remember reading their comments about when the children of Israel came to the Jordan River and they were going to cross over, and you remember the priests were told, put your feet in the water, and the water's divided. Now, when you read that, what do you assume? This was an act of God. That's not what the liberal commentators assumed. They said, well, there must have been something that happened, and they proposed that maybe there was an earthquake that blocked the river for a period of time, and the Israelites crossed over, and they attributed it to God, or a strong wind came and blew the river up so that they could cross over. They could not accept a divine supernatural intervention because they are materialists. Now, are they arguing about the record? No, they are ruling it out because the initial posit won't allow it to be considered. There is nothing supernatural according to them. So don't even talk about supernatural possibilities. They don't apply. They cannot exist. Not based on argumentation, but based on the initial assumptions that are made. See? So, of course, if you're a theist, and that's your assumption, then you would view the data very differently. So my point here is that what we do at the foundational level is of profound significance, okay? Profound significance. Now, so always keep in mind that initial assumptions are important because they determine what will be allowed into the system, right? And this applies to religious thought systems, and I'm here getting now to the main subject I want to talk about tonight. What are the posits or assumptions that have to be made that undergird human thought systems? And I have a list of questions that I think are quite interesting. Are we a part of a reality or an illusion? Hello, folks. Is your experience in life a dream or is it real? And can you prove to me one or the other? There is the possibility that you might wake up tomorrow from your dream that you've been living for however many years and discover that reality is very different from what you have now. There's a possibility of that. I don't think there's a probability. I walked into a tree one day and bent my nose, and that reminded me that life seems to be pretty real. Okay? Or a philosopher was walking with a friend, they were debating this, and the philosopher kicked the stone and said, look at that. He said, that's not a dream. See? But you understand that this has a profound effect on your thought system, on the way you view reality. I was thinking about this while driving a hay truck too, that if this is part of a reality, if we are part of a reality, then this reality is construed a certain way, which means that truth would be defined as a correct understanding of reality, of this reality. That's what truth would be. Okay? Which to me is fascinating. If it's an illusion, then I guess you can have fun and do whatever you have a mind to. Another one here, is there correspondence between our senses and the reality we are part of or not? That's a very interesting question, okay, that I'm not going to expand on, but am I perceiving a reality correctly? Is it possible for me to understand my reality, or is stuff just happening and I'm along for the ride? Here's one. Is there order and system in the reality, or is there not? And you know, throughout history there have been big debates about this. Isaac Newton came to see the whole cosmos as something that was as precise as a finely made clock. And along come other people who say, oh no, chaos prevails at the deepest level. See? Chaos prevails. Is time linear or recursive? Is time moving from a point of beginning to an end, or is it going round and round? Do you understand that the assumptions that people make on that are the primary difference between Eastern religions and West? Because in the Eastern religions, time is going round and round, and you know what you don't do in this life, you will do in the next one. And so there's no urgency like you find in the Protestant world. In the Protestant world, when you grew up, you were told what by your father? Don't waste even a minute, because you're only going to have it once. Any of you ever get told that? Yeah, see. That's where the Protestant work ethic comes in, this idea that time is linear. And of course, if time is linear, it becomes very credible to believe that we're moving from a point of origin to a point of destiny. Okay. This is one reason why in the West we are very industrious. Okay? So, a couple more. Does reality consist only of the material realm, or is there a supernatural realm? I already talked about that. And here's a very, very complicated one. Does ultimate being exist outside of time, or is time a factor of being? That one, when I teach a class about that at Walla Walla when I used to, that one's really a mind stretcher. And I'm not going to get into it here tonight. It's a real mind stretcher as to whether being itself has a temporal component or if it's outside of time. It may be the single most significant theological and philosophical question ever asked. Okay? I was shocked when I read that because I think I was 45 years old before I even knew the question existed. So, anyway, once these are set in place, the process of knowing can begin, and all of this is preliminary to a discussion of religion. Okay? These issues are behind and underneath any religious formulation or any concept of religion that you care to look at. Okay? So, I might just throw this in parenthetically here, that this to me is the Christian knowledge equation, and you'll notice up in the right top there's a little word, revelation. And in the Christian world, we allow revelation to affect the data and to affect the system. Okay? And I will tell you on a personal level that when I realized that, it had a profound effect on my thinking. Okay? Because certainly we would all say, yes, revelation has produced data. But it was a striking thought that maybe there are some hints in the Bible that teach us about the foundational assumptions, and there are. There are some very significant ones. I'm embarrassed to tell you how long it took me to figure it out, because now I can talk about it in about 5 minutes, but it took me several years to figure it out. Sometimes the wood in the head is thick, you know. So to get then specifically to the question of religion and how this is all connected, the religion is a big deal in human life. Okay? It's a big deal. And I'm not going to try and describe it to you, but I want you to think about religion across history. Think of the ideas, the practices, the institutions, the buildings, the artwork that's all connected to religion. Okay? And I'm not here talking about Christianity, I'm talking about religion as a category. You realize that it is a massive thing in human experience. And I like this quotation here from Houston Smith. Houston Smith, by the way, was considered the premier teacher of world religions for many years in the United States. And this comes from his book, Why Religion Matters. Wherever people live, whenever they live, they find themselves faced with three inescapable problems. How to win food and shelter from their natural environment, that's the problem nature poses. How to get along with one another, that's the social problem. But then this, how to relate themselves to the total scheme of things. He calls that the religious problem. If this third problem seems less important than the other two, we should remind ourselves that religious artifacts are the oldest that archaeologists have discovered. Now, not only are they the oldest, they're oftentimes the most elaborate and the most expensive. Okay? So, you understand, and a few years ago I was in Rome and went through the Vatican. I had not been in the Vatican since I was a boy of 16, in St. Peter's, I should say. And I was astonished at that building. And have you ever walked through St. Peter's? Yeah, it's amazing. You know, I don't even know how humans made that. Not only is it a grand building, but it's absolutely exquisite. The artwork, the marble, all that kind of stuff, and I think to myself, all of this, by the way, is tied to religion. Okay. A couple of years ago, I went with some engineering students to India and got to visit the Taj Mahal. Now, the Taj Mahal is not a religious building. It's a mausoleum for a much-loved wife. But it's a fascinating building, okay, that has some connection to life and death, which is part of religious belief as well. Okay. So, the matter of religion is made difficult and urgent today because, as I mentioned right at the outset, religion has a very bad name these days. Okay. And it's a bad name in the public sphere. How many times have you been told, keep your religion out of my science? See? Or you can believe whatever you want, but it should not be allowed to affect public policy. Right? Spirituality is thought to be good. Okay, it's wonderful. You can be a spiritual person. But when people talk about religion, it's restrictive, it's obsolete, it's stifling, it's bad. And mind you, that we are very tolerant in our culture. You can have whatever religious belief you want, just don't bring it out in public. See, that's the general idea. Don't bring it out in public, because those are your beliefs. They're not provable. And so if we allow them to affect public policy, we are in effect allowing you to jam your beliefs down everybody else's throat. That's kind of the perception that exists. And I'm not going to read this slide to you. There's kind of a dichotomy between religion and spirituality. The one is control and freedom, and you can read those lists on your own. And it's probably a longer one here. Bad on the left, good on the right. See, this is a very, very common thing. And even on college campus, I've had students tell me, yeah, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. Okay. Religion is dismissed as something that is not beneficial to humans. Okay, so my question to you tonight then is, what is this thing we call religion? What is it? I call it a multivariate, ubiquitous, highly motivating, expensive, and now disdained thing. And the answer is, it's not easy to define. It's not easy to define. Okay, there are many attempts, and here I call this a scattered definition. I'll come to the white part of this later on, but I want you to look at the yellow one. There is no scholarly consensus over what precisely constitutes religion. No consensus. So I'm going to throw some definitions at you. Okay, this from Donald Ekstrand, and he says, since antiquity, the word religion has been used to signify activity whereby a person gives proper reverence to God, specifically through divine worship. This is a very inadequate definition of religion, but I put it up there because in common thought, at least in the Western world, religion is linked to God. Okay? People think that there cannot be religion minus deity, okay, especially this one. This one interested me, Merriam-Webster online dictionary, and please notice here that God is lowercase g. This fascinated me. I checked it out this morning. I went to the dictionary and I typed in capital G-O-D, capital G. It took me to small letter G-O-D. Okay. Only later on, not even on this slide here, later on do they have God with a capital G. See, so this I'm wondering, why does the dictionary do that? Well, what they say is that religion is the belief in a God or in a group of gods, an organized system of belief, ceremonies, and rules used to worship a god or group of gods. So they also link religion to theism. Very inadequate definition of religion. Okay, I make the point here that not all things that we call religion have deities. Buddhism is one such religion. There are also earth religions that are tied to the earth that do not have deities. Okay, so saying religion is oriented to deity is not correct. Okay, it's inadequate. Another one here from William James, and I actually have two comments from William James that talk about religion as a response. Religion is the feelings, acts, and experiences of individual men in their solitude, so far as they apprehend themselves to stand in relation to whatever they may consider the divine. So here he's talking about religion being a reaction. This definition, by the way, you should keep in mind because it's actually a pretty good one. It's a pretty good one. You'll see that when we get toward the end here this evening. Here again from William James, religion in the broadest sense consists of the belief that there's an unseen order and that our supreme good lies in harmoniously adjusting ourselves thereto. Here, of course, he's thinking of the unseen order being supernatural. And this definition here, I think, falls short because not all things that are religion have assumptions about the supernatural. Okay? But anyway, it's one of the definitions. This one is interesting, from Keith Yandel. He defines religion as a diagnosis of a deep, crippling spiritual disease universal to non-divine sentience that also offers a cure. I had to put those couple of words in there to fill in the sentence, make it make sense. So those are my words. But you'll see here that He describes religion as a diagnosis. And this has interested me a great deal because, he goes on to say a religion is true if its diagnosis is correct and its cure efficacious. And as I've read about world views, it fascinates me that every worldview assumes there's something wrong with the human situation. And they also assume, we have the answer to fix the problem. Okay, this is true universally. Something wrong with the human situation, and we have the recipe for fixing it. That's not just true in Christianity, it's true across the board. Some define it functionally as a set of beliefs, attitudes, and practices that are centered on a person's conception of ultimate reality. This is actually a pretty good definition. Okay, you might want to keep that one in mind. Winifred Corduan, a system of beliefs and practices that provides values to give life meaning and coherence by directing a person toward transcendence. Now, if she hadn't said directing people toward transcendence, I would say this is actually a good beginning definition of religion. Okay? It is a system of beliefs and practices that provides values to give life meaning and coherence. By directing us to our view of reality, which may not include transcendence. Okay? I come here now to some more interesting definitions. You see that as the Western world has drifted away from theism, the definition of religion has become more expanded. Okay? And here I like this one. In our modern secular state, the term religio is used in a more general sense to describe systems of belief to which a person gives assent. Now that's partially true. Yes, it does include systems of belief to which we give assent, but it also has practices and so forth. So this is, but the part I like about this is that it's a more general sense, a more general term to talk about religion. It's not just tied to theism. And this one here, this guy has a very interesting book, Desiring the Kingdom. Once in a while I run into a book that's entirely fascinating. This was one of them. Okay. But look what he says here. Worldview approaches regularly and rightly make the claim that all human beings are inherently religious. Now he's not talking about religion as a theistic thing. He's saying that when you look at the big picture that people cobble together from their stories to create their worldviews, they rightly make the claim that all people are inherently religious. My opinion, this guy is right on the money. All of us are inherently religious. I'll explain that a little further. All human beings at root are believers who are committed to and oriented by a fundamental constellation of beliefs that, even if not reflected upon, govern and control our being and our doing, what James Olthius calls our visions of and for life. So what he's saying here is that all of us have a system of ideas and beliefs that orient and guide our lives, and that's what he's claiming is the function of religion. Okay, that's what religion is, and that's what it does. He's on, and this one here, he goes on, even the secular is ultimately about love of something ultimate with practice intended to form our love. Even secularists have a belief system that guides their living. Okay? This is the function of religion in human life. Okay? It's what makes sense out of life. Terry Muck, he says religion is defined as a set of human practices, and I say to him, well, what about beliefs? Religion is not just practices, it's practices that are guided by beliefs. But anyway, he left that out. That provides for its adherents answers to 4 questions, and you can read, some people say that there are 7 basic questions, other people say there are 8, some people say there are 6. There's no agreement on the basic questions. But Terry Muck says, what is the ideal state of life? What has gone wrong? Who can put things right? And how then should we live? Very important questions, and those are the questions that he says are part and parcel of what we call religion. More from Muck. He says this kind of definition helps us to identify what both groups and individuals consider their religion to be. It is designed to include the extraordinary variety of explicit human religion traditions. Sorry. And he lists some of them there. And also implicit religious intuitions. Notice here, this is where I think this guy is taking us in a very good direction. He talks about explicit human religion and implicit religion. Okay? That what we name as religions, Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, those are explicit forms of religion, but they are implicit ones. They have the same function in human life as the explicit ones, but we just never face that reality. That is ways of being and living that may not be recognized as religious systems, but function as such in people's lives. So, Mark again, at their best, religions provide meaning in the swelter of meaninglessness in which most of us live. Religions provide hope to the hopeless. Okay? This is especially true if the religion links to transcendence and is a very comprehensive system. Okay? If you have a very big story that is produced by your beliefs and assumptions, you have a much better way of creating a context for your living. And back to the scatter definition, and I don't remember who wrote this. That's my name I put on there, but this one here. Religion is a social, cultural system of designated behaviors and practices, morals, beliefs, worldviews, texts, sanctified places, prophecies, ethics, or organizations that relates human to the supernatural, transcendental, and spiritual elements. Now, again, I'm not quite sure that the supernatural and transcendent applies across the board, but the idea of religion being a social, cultural system and there's a long list there of all these things that are all part of what we commonly call religion. Okay. I come now to this gentleman, Roy Clauser. And Roy Clauser, in my opinion, has done some extremely good work on this subject. Okay? He has a big fat book that I read about in somebody else's writings, and I went and bought my own, and you can wade through it. It's a massive document. But I think he has hit the nail on the head in terms of defining religion better than anybody else I've ever read. And so I am a disciple of Roy Clauser. He says that religion actually has three components. And the first one here is what he calls the divine per se element. The second component is an explanation of how everything relates to the divine per se. And the third one is how humans should conduct themselves. And I'm going to go through these ones here, the divine per se. What is the divine per se? The divine per se is some entity, some element, something in your thought system that is non-contingent, meaning it has no explanation for its beginning, it's not dependent on anything else, and it is the ground from which the rest of the system springs. Okay? So, for a theist, a monotheist, that would be God. And it's very interesting because you don't ask questions about where the divine per se came from, because they're unanswerable. And I still remember teaching one day in a class, and there was a young man who had quietly told me that he was an atheist. He was in my class at Walla Walla. And I was talking about God and the divine per se. He said to me, well, where did God come from? And so I said to him, I said, well, where did matter and energy come from? And he said, I don't know. I said, well, you understand that for you, matter and energy is the divine per se of your system. For me, God, a being, is the divine per se of my system. So if you can't answer your question, I should not have to answer mine. And he went quiet. He said, okay, I see the point. See? Now, the point here is that the divine per se, for Pythagoreans, it was numbers. If you read the ancient Greek philosophers, they were very undecided. Some thought it was fire, some thought it was water, some thought it was the sun, who knows. They were all trying to figure out what is in Clauser's words, the divine per se. In other words, it is attributed non-contingency. That's an assumption I make. That's a foundational assumption that in every thought system there is an entity that fits this description. It is a non-contingent thing. We don't know where it came from. We don't know how it got started. It doesn't depend on anything else, but it's the source of everything else. Okay? I like that. That's the divine per se, and I think I have a slide here. It doesn't have to be supernatural, by the way. It's not necessarily the object of worship events. The divine per se doesn't require worship necessarily. It does not have to be mediated through priests or clergy, and it may or may not be empirically provable. the divine per se. It's an assumption that in my system there is this thing which I attribute non-contingency to, and that's where everything begins. Okay? The second level is an explanation of how everything is derived from the divine per se. So in every thought system there's an explanation. You begin with this thing, and then you have to explain how everything came from that thing. And if you're a creationist, you will say there's a divine being called God, and he did thus and so, and lo and behold, this is the story of how reality comes into existence. If you're a materialist, you have a different story. Okay? But you have to be able to explain how the divine per se is connected to the reality that you're a part of. Otherwise, your system becomes nonsensical. Okay? By the way, these descriptions can be very complex and involved. And the third level focuses on humans. In all of these systems that are religious, according to Clauser, there's a third component that after you've identified the divine per se and you've explained how reality comes from the divine per se, there's now another issue. What about you and the divine per se? How did you come into existence? How do you conduct yourself in relation to the divine per se? And again, this can become very complicated. If you're a Christian, then you understand the story of how human beings ought to conduct themselves. A list of admonitions and taboos emerges. And I don't know what you guys think about taboos. I don't think we have very many in the Western world anymore. But in some parts of the world, there are very serious taboos. And if you breach them, you're gone. Okay, you're out. You're out of the community. You may even face the death penalty. In our culture, we think, oh, a taboo, let me breach that and see if anything happens. And that's how we face taboos. Okay, but I mention here again that all comprehensive systems believe there's something wrong with the human circumstance. Am I hearing rain or am I hearing the heating system? No, I'm hearing a whooshing sound. It reminds me when I was a kid growing up in Africa that we had corrugated iron roofs and no ceilings. And I still remember the day we were in church and it rained so hard the preacher had to quit and wait for the rain to be over, pouring down on the roof. So I kind of like that sound. Not that I didn't like the preacher, though. I became one. Okay. So the point here is that once a divine per se is identified, a system for making sense of the world can be developed. There is no system without identifying a divine per se. Okay. So what happens then in life is simply this. In order to make sense out of life, I collect together stories, or I accept stories from my parents, from my teachers, whatever, and I create a view of reality. That view of reality gives me reference points for living. Okay? And please notice that the way that guides my life is both spiritual and religious. You cannot separate these two in reality. What I'm saying to you is it's not possible to separate spirituality from religion. For the simple reason, I think it shows up on a later slide. I might be getting ahead of myself a little bit. But spirituality is the capacity we have to hold and when I say manipulate, I don't mean in a bad way, but we collect and we collect a system of belief and we affect our lives by that. Religion is simply the way you take those beliefs and live them. And so to talk about being spiritual and being religious is actually an error. Okay? The contents of a belief grid always produce a certain way of living. And I think last time I was here I talked about how all of us create these belief grids or belief webs. We have things that we believe that we've drawn from our worldviews. And some of them are high order things and some of them are low order things. Okay? Some of them are life and death decisions. Some of them are preferences, and the one I always ask people is, do you think the toilet paper roll should come off the top or the bottom? And everybody has an opinion about that, right? And don't raise hands, but I bet some of you have been in somebody else's bathroom and changed it so it's the right way. Okay? That's not a life or death matter, but it's an opinion that you have. It's an element of what you think is good and right. Okay? So that belief grid then informs our decision making. As I face possibilities, I run those possibilities through my system of belief, and I make decisions. Yes, no, maybe so. And so the spirituality part is where I contain those beliefs. The religion part is where I take those beliefs and actually live by them. Okay, that's what religion is. It's a function in human life. So your worldview gives you a big picture. Somewhere within your worldview is a divine per se. A system of making sense of life develops. The belief grid within the spiritual capacity gets populated. Humans can make purposeful life-directing decisions. Individuals' life can become sensible and purposeful. That's how it works in life. That's how we make sense out of life. Okay? And sometimes this is something that we just adopt almost thoughtlessly from our surrounding area and our parents. Sometimes it's a very carefully constructed system that we evaluate and critique along the way. So what I'm driving at you tonight is I think we should look at religion as a function in human life. Okay? It is what enables you to live out what you believe. It's the process of living out what you believe. That's what religion is. It's the way we link life to our perception of reality and so make sense of our living. It's what makes it possible to live sensibly and with purpose. Absent religion, you are like a ship without a rudder or a sail. You will just wander aimlessly. Okay? So the point here is that extrinsic religions, or these notable ones, are well known. But there are other systems that function as religions. You can have communism, New Age, atheism, paganism, Wiccan ideology, many more of them. These are complete ideological systems that people adopt and live out. Okay. And I have here, I think the next slide is a very interesting. I clipped this from the local newspaper, the Union Bulletin, some years ago, by a man named Lauren Blackman. I don't know the man, and he used to be prolific in sending in letters, but the editors a few years ago limited people, I think, to 3 or 4 letters a year. They don't want people monopolizing the editor's page. But this guy wrote this here. He said, "The atheist is himself just another brand of religious fundamentalist. His religion involves a comprehensive view of life built upon certain basic unprovable ideas regarding the nature of God, man, law, and the appropriate relationship between them. His beliefs are strong enough to affect his philosophy of marriage, government, ethics, education, and every other area of life. He holds to his faith with a religious zeal so strong it manifests itself as intolerance toward other religious philosophies, and by railing against them he reveals his own religious bigotry." Now that's a bit of a finger in the eye, okay? But I think the man is onto something here, is that religion is, atheism is functioning as a religion in this man, in these people's lives. And by the way, I chuckled about this a few years ago. I noticed that an atheist group sued on account of some privilege religions get, tax-wise. And after looking at the whole case, the judge threw it out and said actually that the atheist could apply for the same exemption because it's a system that functions just like religion. Well, they were not very happy with that conclusion. See, and I'm not here picking on atheists. I just want to recognize that it is a fairly comprehensive belief system that's built on certain assumptions that guides life, as this man said, and therefore that's the definition of religion. So, some implications. Spirituality and religion are not binary but complex. They cannot be separated. And I want to make this point over and over again here tonight because I am tired of hearing, I am spiritual but not religious. Nonsense. You cannot be spiritual and not religious. Not unless you are a what shall I call it, a first-class hypocrite. Okay. You have a belief system. I don't know what it is. I assume because you're here tonight you are theists. Okay. But everybody has a belief system that guides their living. This is spirituality being lived as religion. You cannot separate the two. What people mean when they say I'm spiritual but not religion, they say I don't like that particular religion. So I'm separating myself from that religion, but I still want to maintain the spirituality part. Well, that's fine. You can say I'm spiritual and not that religion, but you're not spiritual and not religious. Everybody is spiritual and religious. It's unavoidable in life, and I think that's it. Actually, when working with college students, they are shocked by this reality. I get more comments about that. Oh, that was a shocking realization. See, I like this Greg Kukel. There's no such thing as a zone of moral neutrality. He said, we are always inflicting our view on others, even when the substance of those views is that all other views are equally valid. Right? If you contend for a particular position, why are you doing that? Because you think it is superior to what other people have. And I think there should be no end to our charity and tolerance to people for what they think, as long as they're not doing dangerous or harmful things. But we all advocate for this, even those who claim they have no religion. Okay? I want to say there can be no freedom from religion because humans are inherently religious. The question is not one of which religion, the question is one of which religion you will subscribe to. There is a foundation here in the U.S. that is arguing for freedom from religion. It's a foundation that has a lot of lawsuits, mostly against theism. They want freedom from religion. I would like to say to them, you know what? You are advocating a particular system of belief. So you are jamming your beliefs down the public's throat by using the law. Okay? No, not a popular position to take. But anyway, I like this definition of Christianity because obviously Christianity is a form of religion. Okay? It's a very comprehensive one. I like this one. The Christian faith is a philosophical tapestry of interdependent ideas, principles, and metaphysical claims that are derived from the Hebrew Christian scriptures, as well as the creeds, theologies, communities, ethical norms, and institutions that have flourished under the authority of these writings. Notice, ideas, principles, and metaphysical claims. When we talk about metaphysical, we're talking about the supernatural realm, all that could possibly be. And Christianity makes claims about that, and claims about life on this earth. It's a very comprehensive system. These beliefs are not mere utterances of private religious devotion, but are propositions whose proponents claim accurately instruct us on the nature of the universe, human persons, our relationship with God, human communities, and the moral life. So if you happen to be a Christian, you have a very comprehensive system that tells a very big story. Okay? That most questions you face in life can be answered by some element of the Christian faith. Okay? And by the way, there is some parts of Christianity that have empirical proof. One of them would be the doctrine of sin. I think there's lots of empirical evidence for the misbehavior and the wrong behaviors of humans. There's a lot of empirical evidence for that. A sad part of the story. Okay? So, my conclusions tonight, every human is both spiritual and religious. It's not possible to be one without the other unless one is willing to become an extraordinary hypocrite. Okay? What shall we conclude about religion broadly defined then? It's an essential link in the process of finding meaning and purpose. Some religions do better at this than do others. And the function of religion is essential. It's life and death business in human experience. And I think my last slide is this one from Bob Egbert, who was a psychiatrist, a psychologist on the campus of Walla Walla. He said one day in an extraneous comment, which he was quite prone to make, he told a group of students, life is too short to fool yourself into thinking that you're not religious. So, I hope I've tweaked your thoughts a little bit, that religion is not only a very significant thing in human life, it's unavoidable. It's endemic to human life. You cannot live without religion, broadly defined. Okay? So, thank you kindly for being here. I guess we can take a few questions for discussion. I didn't look at the clock, but I guess I've talked for a whole hour. So.
Has a question, just raise your hand and we'll talk over the mic to you.
If you don't have questions, we can.
Process, that's fine.
If you don't have questions, we can all go home.
And there are more questions outside.
Oh.
All right. Wait, is the mic on now?
So, obviously, one of the benefits of learning these things is so that we can better communicate with people who share a different worldview and share a different understanding of religion. So, if you're going to tell somebody that their atheistic belief is a religion, it's important to use what you're teaching us now to convey to them, help them understand why what their view is also a religion. So out of all those examples, you give us a lot of examples of how to define religion. What would be your approach to helping that atheist, let's say you're talking to an atheist, helping them come to the same understanding of the definition as you?
Yeah, I think what I would say to them is that, we need to think about what religion is. That when people attack religion, they're mostly attacking theism. Okay? And I like to say to them, your only religion, theism is one little piece of religion. It's one of the religious systems. But religion is much broader than that. And I would try to get them to see that a comprehensive belief system that guides your living is really what religion is all about. And so even though we don't call communism a religion or theism a religion, they function as religions in people's lives. Okay? I've even argued that professional sports functions as a religion in people's lives. Okay? And I probably shouldn't get into that one. But there are places of worship called stadiums. Oh no, don't go there, Dave. Yeah, so that's what I would do. I would help them understand that, religion has to be looked at as a much bigger thing than just theism. It's any comprehensive system that gives you a picture of reality that then is used to guide your life. And that's why I like that statement that guy wrote. It was a little bit snarky to the atheist, but it makes the point that the whole of his life is guided by that system of beliefs. And there's a divine per se element. There's an explanation of how reality came from the divine per se, and then there's the question of how I as a human being should relate to that. Yeah. I don't like to argue with people about this. I just like to say, look, let's think about religion. That was my purpose here tonight. I want you to think about religion as a much bigger thing than just theistic religion. It's something that's endemic to human life. If you don't have religion, your life is nonsensical. Yes, I think there's another person.
Yes, as you defined or described the relationship between spirituality and religion, it seems that a lot of people who claim to be spiritual are objecting to this practice that religion represents.
Yes.
And so we're failing in terms of our religion, in terms of the way we practice it, but perhaps we shouldn't define our religion that way. We should define it by what we believe instead of what we practice, because we're not perfect.
Well, I certainly think we should not hold ourselves up as perfect. But how do you live your religion without it affecting your practice? Now, I don't think you have to have put your practice in the face of some other person as antagonistic, but I can tell you that, and I'll talk about this tomorrow some too, in the morning, that the reasons for rejecting religion, meaning theism, that there are a multitude of those reasons today, and some of them are very deeply embedded in the new ideas that have emerged in the last 30 or 40 or 50 years. Okay? You understand that the minute you propose the existence of deity of any kind, human beings lose their autonomy. I am no longer autonomous if there is a God of any kind. If there is no God, I'm an autonomous being. I do as I please. See? And I'll talk about that tomorrow. That, in my opinion, that's one of the most foundational reasons for the rejection of Christianity in the Western world. We do not want anybody looking over our shoulder. Thank you very much. See? And so, anybody who, and realize that if there is a deity of any kind, there's going to be an element of dogmatism attached to what that deity says, or what that deity is perceived to say. If there is a God and I think God has communicated with me, that's not like when my wife says something to me, or my son. That's of a different category. See? And it becomes very difficult for me to say, well, it doesn't really apply to the rest of you. If there is deity and deity had a hand in the creation of reality, all of us are under obligation, and there is a certain dogmatism to and see, that's a piece that people today do not like at all. Because it presumes also the existence of right and wrong, definitions for right and wrong. It presumes a moral code. And we are highly relativistic. We think everybody should make up their own moral code. So that's where I think some of that's coming from. So I don't know how to avoid being offensive in my practice under that thing. At some point, I'm going to offend somebody because look, I've been thinking about people of conscience. I love people of conscience. I love stories about people who have conscience. But you realize that they are freakingly dangerous. You understand that? Because a person of conscience may tell you one day what? I ain't doing that. And I don't care what you do. You can even be off with my head. I'm not doing that. And I remind you of the film on Desmond Doss, that was so graphically done. What are you going to do with this guy? He will not bear arms. Okay? Beat him up, throw him out of the army, do whatever you want. There's something inside of him that says, I'm not throwing that switch. Sorry, conscience. So I love people of conscience. I mean, the other story that thrills me is the one of the three Hebrews on the plain of Dura. When the king sets up the golden image and he says, all right, everybody bow down. And what? 3 guys don't bow down? Oh, no. Not going to do this. See? People of conscience are wonderful, but they are a real thorn in the side of people who don't like what they believe. So, yeah. Folks, thank you very much for being... Oh, there's one more question over here.
So, in addition to the slides, have you wrote a book on this? Because you presented a whole lot of different authors in this giant hodgepodge.
I'm working on one.
Are you? Okay.
Yeah. Right now it's at 400 pages.
That's cool.
Which is too long. So I started rewriting it, and it's still long. So I know it's one of the things I have to get to in my retirement.
In the meantime, is there a book that you would refer us to that's already written?
Oh, wow. I've had many students ask me that over the years, and the problem is that when you look at foundational issues, I buy books sometimes just to have the introduction and the first chapter, and I don't care about the rest of the book, because this is where they talk about the foundational questions, see? And so it's all over the place. I can't...
Okay.
Well, there's one book that actually comes a little close, Assumptions That Affect Our Lives. That's a book in my opinion, it's not very well written, but at least it is having a look at that thing here. It's not a very big book, it's a little one, Assumptions That Affect Our Lives. My problem is when I'm writing, I get way too involved. So maybe some of you can help me shed that problem. I don't want a 900-page book because nobody will read it. So, folks, thank you for coming out on a rainy night. I look forward to being here with you tomorrow. I'm looking forward to Sabbath morning, where I'm going to talk about religion. Is it good or bad for us? And I want to look at some of the reasons why people reject religion and other reasons why we ought not to. And then I'm going to be preaching a sermon entitled A Fixed Point of Reference. And it's a sermon that I preached many times, but this is a new version. And so even if I don't think it's on the internet anyway, but it had a profound enough impact on my last congregation that I've been invited back every year for the last 20 years to preach that sermon on the first Sabbath of the year. It has some good stories in it, so if you like stories, come on. And then in the afternoon, I'm taking a big risk to talk about science, after I eat a good lunch. So, shall I end with prayer? I'll do that. Father in heaven, thank you for the folks who came out tonight. Thank you for this time of thought and dialogue. Lord, send us on our way realizing that we are inherently religious people, that we may not subscribe to the Christian faith or to Buddhism or something else, but we all are people who have a comprehensive system of beliefs that guide our living and therefore are both spiritual and religious. Help us to rejoice in that and to live well by it, we pray through Christ our Lord. Amen.